Hey there, Erin here. Welcome back to Style So Me. I've got another sew along for you for the Lisa sweatsuit pattern. This is a great beginner pattern to give you some nice loungewear that you can have for the fall and winter, and even sew it up in something a little lighter to take you into spring. So this video is going to be for view A, which is the top. So go ahead and cut out your pattern pieces after you've made your fitting adjustments, adding some length or width wherever you need to. Grab your supplies, get your sewing machine threaded, and let's get started. Okay, so I've got my pieces laid out here for my top, and you know I'm all about efficiency, so I'm going to pin together everything that can be sewn all at once. So I'm going to pin my front to back, right sides together, at the shoulder seam and the side seam. And we're going to pin all of this stuff together, and then we're going to take it to the sewing machine to make our sewing more efficient, and then we're going to take it over to the ironing board to press it. So we're going to sew as much as we can, pin as much as we can, sew as much as we can, and press as much as we can, instead of going, you know, pin, sew this stitch, press it, pin, sew this stitch, press it. That takes too long. So we're going to be more efficient here. Now normally for these shorter pieces, like these shoulder and side seams, I wouldn't even bother pinning these, but I'm doing so just to give you some space, if you choose to pin yours together. So if you don't pin, then just skip this. Okay, so my front to back is pinned at both shoulders and both side seams, so I'm going to set that out of the way. So now I've got my sleeves, and I'm going to fold them right side together and pin along that seam. For the cuffs, right side together, I'm going to fold them to where the short ends meet. And we're going to do the same for the waistband. We're going to fold it right side together and pin at the short end. So we've got all of our pieces pinned, and we're going to go and sew all of these seams that we just pinned at the sewing machine. So let's go. So I'm using a bright green thread in my needle so you can see what I'm doing. But of course you want to grab thread that matches your fabric. And so I've shown this in previous sew alongs, but I'll show you how I like to sew to make my sewing go a little fast, even more faster. So I'm going to sew, and remember my patterns are 1/2 inch seam allowance, okay? I'm going to baste just to save thread, but you will sew with the appropriate stretch stitch for your fabric. So I sew, I back stitch, I sew my seam, I back stitch, and then I grab the next piece. I raise my needle, position my next piece of fabric, back stitch, or whatever type of stitch you need to secure, and I sew, raise my needle, pull it out a little bit, move on to the next one, and I just continue on sewing all of my seams that way. And it saves me time from having to sew, pull out the thread, cut it, and then start all over again. So now that I've got all my seams sewn, I'm going to snip these threads. All right, so take all of these seams that you've just sewn to the ironing board and press all of your seam allowances. And then we're going to move on to the next step. All right, so we've got our pieces sewn and you have pressed your seam allowance. This is just a test mode for me, so I'm not going to bother. I'm going to flip those sleeves to the right side and then grab your sleeve cuffs. So here's my sleeve cuff. I'm going to fold it wrong sides together, making sure that seam lines up. And a trick to getting your seam allowance to lay flat, snip one end of your seam allowance to the stitching so that it can go either way. So when you fold, you can switch that seam allowance to the other side. So if you hadn't stitched it, you would be essentially sewing through 6 layers of fabric. So if you switch that other piece of seam allowance to the other side, it helps your sewing go a lot smoother and it helps that seam be a lot smoother. So go ahead and turn your cuffs to the right side. So you're folding them in half, wrong side together, and then you're going to pin them to your sleeve. If you would like, you can also baste this together to make sure that it stays in place. Just do a quick basting stitch within your seam allowance, and then you're going to slide that over your sleeve and pin in place. And you're going to stretch it to make sure everything aligns and the ease is evenly distributed. And you're going to repeat that on your other sleeve. So next we're going to do the same thing on our bigger waistband. We're going to snip that seam allowance and then fold wrong side together. Now because this one is a much larger cuff, I am going to pin it all the way around and I'm going to baste this together first. It's easier to skip the basting process on smaller pieces, but for my larger pieces, I tend to not do that. I know it seems like an extra step sometimes, but these extra steps really help with the quality and they help with speed, because if you skipped a step such as this and then you ended up fudging it up, then you have to pick it out and then go back and redo it, essentially spending 2 to 3 times the amount of time that you would have spent had you just basted it together. So I've pinned that together and I'm going to baste that. And the neckline of our top can be folded down. You can press your 1/2 inch hem allowance around your neckline. I definitely recommend pressing it, and then we're going to stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to pin it so that it makes that hemming process easier. Now I have a cover stitch machine, and so I would definitely use my cover stitch to hem this neckline. If you do not, you can use a twin needle, but you can also use a regular needle if you would like. A ballpoint needle for your knits. but I want you to pin and press, so it'll give it a nice clean finish and no guesswork and wrinkling around this neckline. It's a nice boat neck neckline. It looks a lot better. So now we're going back to the sewing machine to sew all of the areas that we've just pinned. So now you can snip those threads. And finish the raw edges of your cuffs on your sleeves. And when you've done that, go to the ironing board, turn everything right side out, and give everything a nice, good press. You can also press your bottom waistband on your top to give it a nice clean press as well. And do the same for your neckline. So now, after you've done that, we're going to attach the waistband to the bottom of your shirt. Aligning the notch of your waistband to the center front of your shirt and the seam of your waistband to the center back. And we're going to do that right side together. And then we're also going to pin our sleeve to our shirt. And so what I like to do is turn my shirt inside out. And I grab my sleeve. So this is my shirt. Here's the armhole. And then I put my sleeve up under there, matching the underarm seam with the side seam, like that. And then I pin it all the way around. So now that you've got one sleeve pinned, go ahead and do the same with the other sleeve. All right, so you've got your sleeves pinned and you've got your waistband pinned, so now it's time to sew. And the waistband. So I'm going to flip it right side out so I can get access to the right side of that waistband. So now all that's left to do is to press that seam allowance that you've just sewn. Finish all of the raw edges with your serger or a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, and you're done with your top. So this wraps up the sew along for the top of your Lisa sweatsuit. Check out my other sew along video for view B, the pants for the Lisa sweatsuit, in the next video. I'll see you there.